Hey, Crim 5, here we go with Chapter 9. We're going to talk about police discretion and community relations, and this is kind of a big one, so I guess first and foremost we need to figure out what it is. Discretion. Discretion is when an officer is allowed to use their judgment to make a decision as to how they're going to handle whatever the matter might be. So, as your book says here, the police are street interpreters of the law. A lot of people would say that discretion is a negative thing for police to have, and in certain instances, I can understand that thought. But we're gonna talk about a way where it might actually be a good thing as well. But anyways, we'll get further into that. But the police selectively determine what and how the law is to be enforced, and police discretionary decisions are frequent street decisions having directly affecting individual citizens and neighborhoods. So I challenge you all right now to think about a time, maybe when you were a lot younger, when you might have had contact with law enforcement and they might have let you go and not arrested you for something. Think back to those days, and I'm going to say I will admit, as a kid, was driving somewhere, I don't remember exactly where I was, and I had a case of beer in the back of my SUV. It was in a car. I know the officer pulled me over, had to see it. I was probably 17 at the time. I had not been drinking, but I did have this in the back of my car. And he let me go. What if he hadn't let me go? Where would I be today? Did he only let me go because I was a young white girl? I don't know. We're going to get more into that later. But consider the fact that real minor offenses, a lot of times officers are not going to take the time to prosecute people, and that might be a benefit in certain instances. Now, we're going to obviously get into the whole how is that discretion, how is it used? So it is an individual choice, and there are, if a police officer comes upon a murderer, I think it's very unlikely that the murderer is not going to be arrested. So, but this discretion is not only at the level of a police officer, but it does start there. Discretion is personal, which means every person's idea of what is appropriate is going to be different. Think about the California Highway Patrol, and you got a 22-year-old highway patrolman pulls you over to give you a ticket. Are you getting a ticket? Yes, you're getting a ticket, because his mindset might be different than the 55-year-old CHP officer who pulls you over to give you a ticket. Discretion requires judgment, and that judgment can sometimes be unfair. Discretion often, oh God, here come my dogs. So you're going to hear a bunch of, probably fighting, in about a minute when my dogs jump up here. So, but discretion is definitely something that each officer sees differently. Police will use discretion probably every single day. Not everyone that they pull over, or everyone that they have contact with, even if they are guilty of a crime, they're not always going to get arrested. And, yeah. Discretion does not stop, like I said, at police. Prosecutors also make decisions whether to file charges or not. Judges can review legal questions. They have a lot of discretion as well. Correctional officials also have discretion. So although we're focusing on police and their use of discretion, understand it doesn't stop with the police. Discretion is throughout the criminal justice system in many instances. And if you'll remember the case, it happened a couple years ago where a young swimmer guy from USC, I believe, Stanford, maybe it was Stanford, but he was on the swim team at Stanford, and he raped a young lady in an alley behind a nightclub. And the judge, in his discretion, sentenced that young man to 90 days in jail. 90 days in jail. For reals, I know. And he ultimately only did 30. So, discretion definitely starts with police, but it definitely goes much deeper than police. They can bend the law, blah, 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 blah. The invisibility of officers' choices. When a police officer chooses to act as a legislator, prosecutor, and would-be judge, few people would ever learn about it or review their decisions. We're going to kind of go through this. So think about, I would say right now, I'm recording this right now during the coronavirus pandemic. We are quarantined at home or ordered to stay shelter in place. So things are really insane in our community right now. Do you think that might be a time when a police officer might be more willing to use discretion and give people a break because of all the other stressful things that are going on in the community? I do think so. So there are different things that could impact this, but also think size of the city. If you are in a small town and a police officer, I would say just Clovis versus Fresno. Clovis, they're probably more likely to arrest you and do the paperwork and take you in, as opposed to Fresno, because Fresno's a lot busier. So discretion also has to do with things that are going on in the community, the size of the community, things like that. So these are also, again, things that could happen. Police typically are not going to publicize the fact that they use discretion. It's probably best that way. There are a couple of other things that might impact whether or not a police officer is going to use discretion. The situation, what is the nature of the offense? What is the nature of that person's involvement in the offense? Environmental factors, education and experiential, factors, and police work rules. So police officers might change the way they do things based on certain factors. There are some negatives in discretion. It does breed corruption. Justification for keeping selective enforcement policies secret may serve to increase abuse and community distrust. So we talked a couple slides ago, I mentioned that police agencies typically don't advertise that they use discretion. There's a lot of reasons for that. And so when I was talking at the beginning of this chapter about maybe the more positive end of discretion, there are some negatives to using discretion. And I think if the community knew how much discretion is used by police officers, they might be kind of unhappy with it. So other common justifications, community may want laws to be applied discriminatorily against objectionable persons. Other parts of the criminal justice system may have suspended the operation of some laws. Might be inconvenient to follow the laws. Is it professional? Would you consider a police officer police professionalism requires that the making of technical and moral decisions that affect the fate of people. Again, is this a professional tool that officers should use? Trying to go to the next slide. It's not working. Okay. Police officers are vested with a duty to maintain order and make arrests for offenses. Statutory law denotes the criminal act. It does not allow for discretion, which is really interesting. However, case law says, yeah, you can, in certain instances, use discretion. So explicit policies must be developed to prevent abuses of power. So if officers are going to use discretion, which they're going to, and honestly they would have to, because there's no way our court system could keep up with the number of offenders that we have that are making contact with law enforcement on a daily basis. Racial profiling is an issue when you are talking about police discretion. A young white female is much less likely to get arrested for a criminal offense than an older, not old, I mean like teenage, early 20s black male. Public image becomes an issue, and it's the community, although discretion is something that is it is required, it's difficult to do it in a fair manner. Citizen complaints will become an issue. So I'm just kind of going through this because I don't think that any of this is super, super important. What I really want you to get out of this chapter is the whole concept that, number one, discretion is used. Why is it used? And is it a positive thing or a negative thing? And I'm going to leave that up to you to decide. I think it could go either way, but I want to make sure that you understand that the negatives that go along with it as well.